some words to you from my favorite Bible commentary regarding what Dave just read for us. Quote, "The disciples here are attempting to enforce the standard social mores. And the standard social mores during the life of Jesus included that children should not be allowed to disturb the teacher and his students. Once again, this behavior shows that the disciples do not understand the point of Jesus' ministry, which is inclusive, not exclusive. Including the children also made it possible for the women who had the responsibility of caring for them to hear Jesus' teaching. Children were not considered persons in their own right. They had no status or power. Jesus is warning the disciples that they must give up the normal human calculations of greatness if they are to participate in the rule of God. These standard social mores were clear, and they were exclusive of women and children. And this isn't the first time. The lectionary the last month or so has really been driving this home. Jesus is trying to teach the disciples that he is not going to follow the normal social mores. That his ministry is about inclusivity, not exclusivity. So this got me thinking about that, Holy Communion. And I think it's a good thing from time to time in the life of a Christian faith community that we take a few minutes and talk about the meaning of this meal, the various ways that we can look at it. It's inclusive, and all of this is preamble to when I'm really going to start preaching. I'll let you know. This is all preamble so far. I've got 2 stories from my life about Holy Communion that happened to me. One of them is exclusive, and one of them is inclusive. And I'm going to finish with the one that is inclusive in order to drive the point home. So I'll let you know when the sermon is actually starting. Now, we heard a few minutes ago, I read it for you, Psalm 26. And Psalm 26, we heard verses 1 through 3, and verse 3 goes like this. "For your steadfast love is before my eyes, and I walk in faithfulness to you." Now, this is unusual language in the psalm. The psalmist is writing about his or her relationship with God, and it's rare in the Bible when we have someone who says, "I walk in faithfulness to you." How do we walk to God? I'm going to make the case. Now remember, I haven't started the sermon yet, but I'm trying to make the case that the way to walk to God is to be inclusive in our thinking and in our way of life. And the Hebrew verb that we translate to walk in faithfulness to you, it actually means much more than walking. It means a way of life. A way of life of walking to God, including making that circle as wide as possible. So what is Holy Communion? Holy Communion. Holy Communion the establishment of the Lord's Supper is talked about in 3 of the 4 Gospels. John doesn't really use the Lord's Supper language. And it's also mentioned in 1 Corinthians. And essentially, the meaning of the Lord's Supper is, I'm quoting an expert here, believers, quote, feed on Christ's body and blood. Our souls feed on the Christ. It's important to notice and to remember that you can't do Holy Communion alone. You can't do it. Well, you can do it at home alone and fool yourself, but it's not Holy Communion. You've got to have a group. It's got to be people coming together. And this is Matthew 26. Now remember, the sermon hasn't started yet, so just get comfortable. Matthew 26, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." We're very sure we know pretty much exactly what kind of bread that was, because it was unleavened bread, and they were gathering for the Passover. And by the way, we have fabulous, this bread that I get to break whenever we have Holy Communion, it's always really tasty, because I have some after the service. Now, Jesus did not go out and buy any special bread, and this is an important symbol. It was bread that was already on the table. Common. Inclusivity. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." He said, "Take and drink." Why did he say all of you? Anybody want to guess? Judas was there. And we're told that Jesus knew what was going on. There is one thing that I am so sure of, and I'm just going to say for me, there is one thing that I am absolutely sure of, and that is this: I am not Jesus. There are people in my life, I'm not proud of this, I haven't really forgiven them. I'm still working on it. Nobody here, none of you. I'm still working on it. I hope someday I can forgive them. I wish them no ill. I really don't. Take and drink, all of you, even you, Judas. This is important stuff. I had a kind of very brief conversation with one of you this morning. You initiated it, and it's kind of staying with me in a good way. Not kind of staying with me in a good way, it's staying with me in a good way. And you came up with a very brief hallway conversation wondering what banner we should put out front now. And the comment was made, we want to pick one out in light of the coming presidential and state election. What kind of message can we put out there? I like that kind of thinking. It's like Jesus welcoming Judas with the cup. Okay, now I'm going to start the sermon. Ready? Here we go. This is a replica. You can't see it. I can show you after the service. This is a communion token. The First Presbyterian Church in Marysville, Ohio, my home church, was founded in 1829. It's a much older and established congregation than this one. It's 5 years, 1829. And this is a replica of what was called a communion token. Now, by the way, that was a Presbyterian church that was anti-slavery. Just want to get that on the record. And around the turn of the 19th and the 20th century, there was a very conservative movement that went throughout most of the Protestant denominations in the United States. And during that time, the First Presbyterian Church in Marysville, you couldn't take communion unless you turned in your communion token. I'll show it to you later. And it's on one side it says, "This do in remembrance of me." And you had to earn your communion token by doing things like going to church so many times per month and going to Sunday school class and that sort of thing. I'm sure it didn't hurt if you would tithe, right? And if you didn't earn the right to take communion, you didn't get your communion token. This is exclusivity. So, a whole year before Vicki and I got married, we'd been married for 42 years. I was living in Alliance, Ohio, and she was living in Painesville, Ohio. And so we would get together on the weekends. Usually in Painesville, and we hid it from my parents, but my mom found out, was absolutely appalled. "You're living together on the weekends?" Oh, sorry, Mom. Anyway, I would go to church. I knew I was going to go to seminary, but I wasn't ready. And every Sunday for a whole year, I went to a different church. I would drive all over. I went all over Northeast Ohio. I went to Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, you name it. UCC. I didn't really go to any Catholic churches, but there's more on that in a minute. And it doesn't really matter what the denomination was, I'll tell you. That particular Sunday I went to a Lutheran congregation. And everybody was nice and the sermon was fine, and I saw that they were doing communion. So we had the sermon, and then we had a hymn, and then it was time for communion. And as soon as it was time for communion, everybody stood up. So I went, "Oh, okay." I stood up. And then these people went over there, and those people went over there, and everybody went everywhere, and everybody knew what was going on except for me. I didn't know what to do. So I left. I'll never forget it. That feeling of not being a part of the group. Nobody said anything for the benefit of visitors and guests. And I'm not mad at anybody, but I still think about it. And now here it is. Inclusivity. Fast forward the tape. Vicki and I had been married maybe 5 or 6 years, and she had a business trip for a week in Boston, Massachusetts, and I went along with her. And Boston's great. You know, you even by yourself, they have I think they call it the Freedom Walk, and it was great. Went to Fenway Park. Fenway Park does not disappoint. Don't get me started. And that was the old Fenway. And I got up and I went to church Sunday morning, and there was a Catholic big cathedral right down the street. And I thought, I'm going to go to church at the Catholic Church. And it was great. And so we did the service, and then of course there's communion towards the end of the service. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go up. And these people aren't even going to know. They don't even know. They probably think I'm Catholic, but I really wanted to receive communion. So I did. And I received communion. And I was part of the group. And then the Protestant in me came out after the service. I said to myself, I'm going to tell the priest. And I went up to him after the service, and I smiled and I stuck out my hand, and before I could say a word, he said, "You're Protestant, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am. I'm choking up a little bit, how much it meant to me. I am. Yeah, how'd you know?" He just said, "Oh, I can tell." And I said, you gave me communion. And he smiled, and he put his hand on her shoulder, kind of just did one of these, and said, "God bless you," and turned and walked away. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was Holy Communion. And that's what it means. Amen? Amen.